I'm Janet Dewart-Bell, and I'd like to welcome you to Race, Rights, Righteous Anger, Redemption, and Hope, the Intergenerational Path Forward, presented by LEAD Intergenerational Solutions. LEAD was founded in 2017. Our moderator today is the legendary television anchor and reporter Carol Jenkins. Born in Montgomery, Alabama, she became, in 1970, one of the first African-American anchors at a major television station, WNBC in New York City. Among her many career highlights is an eyewitness report from South Africa on Nelson Mandela's release from prison. She later hosted a daily talk show and is today the host of Black America on CUNY television. With her daughter, Elizabeth Gardner Hines, she co-authored Black Titan, A.G. Gaston, and the Making of a Black Millionaire, the story of her uncle. A.G. Gaston provided critical financial support to the civil rights movement. Carol is co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition.
We are so honored today to have with us one of the great men of our time, Andrew Young, who has a singularly impactful career in causes of advancing justice and of advancing freedom, a close confidant and partner of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Ambassador Young was active in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and present at all of the key points in American history, negotiating the Birmingham and Selma, Alabama desegregation agreements, helping to lead the Poor People's Campaign after Dr. King's assassination, being elected congressman, being appointed by President Jimmy Carter as the United States ambassador to the United Nations, and being elected mayor of Atlanta from 1982 to 1990. He also co-chaired the Atlanta for the Olympic Games in 1996, as we all remember. A theologian, Ambassador Young was elected as the 20th president of the National Council of Churches in 2003. His numerous honors include the NAACP's 1970 Spingarn Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1981. Georgia State University has named its School of Policy after him. He is co-chair of Good Works International and a director of the Drum Major Institute. Ambassador Young is married to the former Carolyn Watson. He and his first wife, the late Jean Childs Young, we remember very fondly, have 4 children. He is accessible, he's generous, he's gracious. We thank him for spending some time with us today. Ambassador, thank you so much for this. We have some questions from some young people coming up. I know I said before we started our conversation, if it was okay for me to ask how old you are or to tell it. Would you like me to ask or would you like to tell it because you look fabulous?
No, let's put it this way. I was born with Franklin Roosevelt's presidency in 1932. That makes me 88 now.
Wow.
But it means I've lived through, and I started out early. I was born in a mixed neighborhood, lower working class. I think my parents were the only people in the neighborhood that had finished college. But it was an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another. The Nazi Party was on the third corner.
Wow.
And I was right in the middle. And
well, it stood you in, good stead. That was an historic beginning, and the fact that you
really
referenced it
because
to the president is a sign of the way you see the world as well.
Well, it also means that I had my first lessons in white supremacy before I went to kindergarten at 4 years old. That my father explained to me that Nazism is white supremacy. And they were hiling Hitler 50 yards from where I was born. And
Mm.
you know,
Right.
and he said, you know, these are sick people, and you don't get angry with sick people. In fact, when you get angry, the blood rushes from your head to your fist or your feet, and you're never going to be big enough to beat up everybody. But if you stay cool and calm and think, you can think with anybody. And so he also then took me to see Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympic Movietone News.
Right.
And Jesse Owens, of course, when he won the 100-meter dash, rather than give him his medal, Hitler stormed out and took all of his stormtroopers with him. But my father pointed out, but Jesse didn't get upset. He just went on and won 3 more gold medals. And you don't get mad, you get smart. You keep your head, and don't let anybody upset you. Some of us have to be even enough in our thinking and calm enough in our spirits so that we can deal with any of the sickness that's in the world. And said, you'll find that the sickness is also in your family sometime. It's in you, but you don't want to get upset at yourself. And I frankly think that the relationship between anger and fear is much closer. Most of the people who get angry are fighting fear.
I want to ask you about Reverend Dr. Paul Smith, who we talked with in part 1 of this series, and you know, he talked about introducing you to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the two of you certainly were able to follow this path of nonviolence and peaceful, and you know, just eyes straight ahead and determination. But it seems not to be so easy these days for many of our young people.
Well, but they didn't have fathers like Martin and I had. You know, Martin's father was born in a rural Georgia, and he actually got run out of town simply because when he started learning to count as a little boy, 13, 14 years old, he started questioning the way the farmer took care of, was actually stealing from his parents. And he confronted them, and he had to leave town or be killed. And that's what brought him to Atlanta. My father grew up in rural Louisiana, and you had you had almost no rights that anybody had to respect. You couldn't, you had to control the situation. And like, I was taught that you never act like you're afraid of anybody. Along with that, I should say, my grandmother was blind. And she was in her 80s. And between 80 and 86, I had to read the newspaper and the Bible to her every day. And I got her advice and wisdom, which was different from my father's. My grandmother said, look, if somebody picks on your little brother and you don't fight him, when you come home, you're going to get a whipping.
Grandmother's advice, right?
My daddy's advice was, he made sure we went to the gymnasium, which was about 8 or 10 blocks from our house. We could run there, and he knew a lot of the boxers because he fixed their teeth for free, and they ended up the way they paid him back was teaching my brother and I how to box. And one of the things you learn in a boxing ring is you don't get mad and start swinging wild. You have to, if you lose your temper in a fight, you lose the fight. And I heard that from the boxers, and I heard that from my father.
Right. So, Ambassador, we are definitely in a fight now, some would say, many would say. So we're not going to get mad. We're going to plan smartly. What do we need to do now? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of,
well, we're not going to try to take them on all at a time. We're going to take, I learned to take life one day at a time. I don't have to solve all the problems of the future. I just have to get through this day and tomorrow, maybe. And if I can, and for instance, going to my first church, which wasn't in Brooklyn, it was in South Georgia.
Right.
And I was asked to run a voter registration drive and agreed. And this was in 1956. So that was right after Emmett Till and
right.
The Montgomery bus boycott. And we saw, we were coming back into town, and there were about 200 people, Klansmen in sheets. And I had not studied nonviolence yet, but my wife had. So my approach was that if they come to bother us, that I would have to go out and talk to them. But it would help if she would sit in the window with the rifle. And
it's a good thing to have a partner, right? Good cop, bad cop, so to speak.
That she said no.
Oh, really?
And because she had gone to a little school in Indiana, she was from Alabama. She had grown up with the Klan. She and Coretta King were from the same town. Coretta's house was burned down when she was 15. See, and by the Klan, just because her family was successful. Jean's family lost all of their property when she was about 12, and her family was so devastated that her grandfather committed suicide, and her mother got fired from her job because the superintendent hit on her and she whacked him upside the head with an umbrella. And so she couldn't get a job anywhere in the county. But these were women who, from their childhood, had been fighting racial battles. And her attitude to me was more Christian than anything I'd ever heard before. And she said, I can't point a gun at a human being. I said, that ain't no human, that's a Klansman. That's the Ku Klux Klan. She said, yeah. And you're supposed to be a preacher. I said, what's that got to do with it? She said, everything. If you ever forget that under that sheet is the heart of a child of God, you need to quit preaching. And I said, what kind of crazy woman did I marry? And I said, but they will burn down this house and with a baby and you and all three of us go up and smoke, and that's the end of it. She said, so you preach death, you preach the cross and the resurrection. It might just be our time to bear the cross. Because she would not let me settle on violence or even defensive violence, she made me think, and I finally said, well, I'm going to go talk to the mayor. And I talked to the mayor, who ran the hardware store in town. And he picked up the phone and he called the two largest employers, Honeyland Packing Company and Flowers Bakery, and told them that I was there and that I'd seen the Klan, that I was having a voter registration drive, and I didn't want the Klan to interfere with anything. And so the plants, the people who own the businesses in town said, look, we don't want any violence here. We will tell the sheriff that he can let the Klan have their meeting on the courthouse steps, but don't let them go into the Black community and harass Black citizens. Now, what she forced me to do was to think. And when I started thinking about it, I said, well, let me see if I can make this government work. And
you did.
But that was the lesson. That lesson that I learned in 1956. I also applied in 1963 when we went to Birmingham. And before we started demonstrating, Dr. King said, Andy, do you know any white people in Birmingham? I said, I don't know. I don't think so. He said, see if you can meet some. And I said, what for? He said, before we start demonstrating, we want to start talking to some of the community leaders to tell them why we're demonstrating, what we're going to do, and what they could do to bring it to an end. And that the way he put it, that we were born Black, they were born white. Can't do anything about that. What we can do something about is that we were born in an unjust relationship. And in order to keep us down, they have to keep one foot down in the gutter to keep us down. And why can't we just stand up together and have a new relationship as brothers?
Ambassador, I have two questions I want to ask you before we get to these great questions from our young audience. Number one, in a recent speech, you were talking about the United States of America, the pandemic and the racial strife and all. And I think what I read you saying was that you thought that there would have to be a world reorder after we get out of all of this, that the United States will be in need of assistance, will be in need of help. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, of where you think we are as a country?
Remember, I said I was born with Franklin Roosevelt.
Right.
And so my awakening to what's going on in the world, especially with the Nazis on the corner, and I knew a little bit about the First World War. I wasn't born then, but I knew that they formed the League of Nations, and the League of Nations didn't work because the United States was not a member, I think. And that Franklin Roosevelt knew that also. And so he planned, and the reason I know so much about it is that a lot of his planning was done through Ralph Bunche.
Mm-hmm.
Black man
Ralph
at the United Nations. Had been a professor at Howard University.
Right.
And he took a leave of absence in 1937 to 1939. And he did a study of all of Africa and the Middle East that really turned out to be the basis for the United Nations. Now, almost nobody talks about that, but that's one of the most important events in the history of the planet, because Ralph Bunche conceived of a world, along with Franklin Roosevelt, a world where people, instead of fighting wars every 15 or 20 years, that they would meet regularly and talk over their differences. And that's what the United Nations was designed to do. Ralph Bunche did most of the writing that defined the rules and regulations and bylaws of the committee structure of the United Nations.
He was a genius.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know about Ralph Bunche.
Right.
Ralph Bunche was always one of my heroes.
Mine too. So what's this new world order, though, that you think will come out of
he
the situation?
Well, I don't know whether nobody else is thinking that way now. See, that's the problem, that the world order that Ralph Bunche and Franklin Roosevelt and that every other president almost since then, some more than others, but none more than Jimmy Carter,
right,
understood the importance of the United Nations and realized that America could run the world from the United Nations. And that's why he asked me to go there as the ambassador to the United Nations, because I had been with Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King was associated with Ralph Bunche. And he understood the connections from Roosevelt to Bunche to the civil rights movement to a new world order.
Yeah, Ambassador, I think this is a good point at which we should bring in some questions.
Ambassador Young, you were a part of voter registration and mobilization at a time when it required you to literally risk your life. And as we approach the 2020 elections with the vote by mail and USPS issues happening, I was wondering if you had any advice on how you build organizing skills and resiliency among young people.
Dr. King used to say that death is the ultimate democracy. I don't care what color you are, I don't care how rich you are, you're going to die. And you don't have anything to say about when you die, how you die, where you die. Your only choice is what is it you risk your life and give your life for. And so once you decide that voting is worth risking your life, and you overcome, well, he helped us overcome the fear of death. And the way he overcame the fear of death for himself, because we knew he was the one most likely to be killed. And he knew it. And see, when he started out, he was just 25 years old in Montgomery. And he had been stabbed. His home had been bombed. He had been sued. He'd been jailed and, put in solitary confinement. Nobody knew where he was for 3 days. I mean, all of this happened to him before he was 30. So he had decided that what he was doing was worth his life.
Ambassador, we have another question for you.
Ambassador Young, first off, thank you so much. I must say it is such an esteemed privilege to be able to take part in today's dialogue. You once said, and quite eloquently might I add, the quieter and calmer the demonstration, the more effective it is. But, we're living in very polarizing times now in 2020, and the generation today is not as willing to take that high ground approach as our predecessors were back in the 1960s. We find also that in the midst of our organizing, there are factors that infiltrate and try to impede upon our message. Thus, my question to you is, what is the best way? We live in a world that's so interconnected in 2020. What is the best way to really safeguard our message so that when we are heard effectively?
We had no choice but to organize. And because we knew any demonstration might mean death. And it took you 2 or 3 months. See, it took us 3 months to organize enough people in Birmingham to get 55 people to go to jail with Martin Luther King. Black Lives Matter got 55,000 in 15 minutes. See? So cell phones and social media make it so much easier to organize that they got the part of the movement that was, above the water. But the majority of the power of the civil rights movement, like with an iceberg, is underwater. The more quiet and serene your demonstration is, the more powerful it is. And I learned this from Roman Catholic Cardinal Dom Helder Câmara in Brazil. And everybody that marched, the Brazilian army and police would, they just beat them up and shoot them down, just ruthlessly. And Dom Helder Câmara decided to lead a demonstration. But he got mostly women, almost all women, but he got them to carry their statues of the Virgin Mary. And these women walked down in the midst of these police. And when the police ran up to push them back or to charge them, they knelt down. And the police could not beat women on their knees holding statues of the Virgin Mary. That was strong enough spiritually to challenge their government.
Very, very sage advice. We have another question for you.
Hi, my name is Lola. First, I would just like to say thank you so much. It is really an honor to be able to be asking Ambassador Young a question. My question is, how can I, as a young white girl growing up in America, help move the movement of racial equity forward from protesting to seeing and making real change?
Well, you can just be the best you that you can be. And if you decide to be a teacher, just be the best teacher that you can be. Any children you can teach. I've been married to 2 teachers, and I would say that both of them together have impacted the economy through the people that they taught more than I have been able to do as a congressman, the mayor, United Nations ambassador, and bringing the Olympics to Atlanta.
And we have another question from another student.
Hello, Ambassador Young. What advice would you give young people based on your experiences in the civil rights movement for things that they want to change about the future? How would you expect them to go about changes that they want to see in the world? Also, are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
Remember, in the beginning, I said when I started, the Nazi party was on the corner of my house and people were hailing Hitler. It took a whole world war and hundreds of thousands of people were killed to deal with Nazism. So the world that I grew up in is far worse than this world. With all of the problems we've had, we at least, thank God, have not had another world war.
And are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
I don't use either one of those words. I am faithful. I do the best that I can, one day at a time.
I want to ask you one final question, and that is after hearing your extraordinary experiences and all of the lessons that you've imparted to all of us, a question about the legacy, the most important thing that you would want people to remember about all of these and just simply magnificent things that you've done with your life.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's my life. And it belongs to whoever put it together. And we call that God. And we believe in my house that Jesus is the closest expression to what God might be like. would want us to be like. But I couldn't understand Jesus when I was growing up because everybody painted him with white, with blonde hair. But then I read Gandhi, and I learned about Gandhi as the little brown Hindu who read Jesus different than the people had been reading about Jesus and teaching me in Sunday school. And he talked about a revolutionary Jesus whose nonviolent spirit can change the world. And so I found out my Christianity from a Hindu. And then when we started having problems with Vietnam, a Buddhist monk came to see Martin Luther King, and I got to know him. And through Buddhism, he taught us a lot more about spirituality and why these Buddhist monks were willing to sit there and set themselves on fire to call attention to a war that was unjust. And I'm always learning about life from everybody, including this virus.
What is the lesson? What is the lesson you learned from this?
Well, it's that everything on earth has meaning and purpose, and you ignore it at your peril. Every day is a new day, a new opportunity to learn something, and a new opportunity to share something. And that's what life is about. Life is not about answering problems, it's about facing problems.
Wow.
And the
I
problem,
love that.
and you face problems, and it's like lifting weights. When I was lifting, 100 pounds 20 times a day, I was stronger than I am now because I don't lift any weights anymore. And I used to run, and I used to play tennis, and I used to swim. And all of that energy that went into building my body now gets translated to my mind because that's the only thing that doesn't hurt. Everything else I try to do hurts. So this doesn't hurt.
Ambassador Young, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your experiences, your wisdom with us, the ways that you came about that wisdom, which are so instructive to all of us. Thank you I'll say it, thank you for the contributions that you've made, even though you were just doing it one day at a time and facing problems as opposed to turning your back to them. We really appreciate that example. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for this. It makes another day worthwhile.
We thank Ambassador Young for his extraordinary interview. We'll present more of this conversation in part 3 of the series. Ambassador Young risked his life for voting. That's something that too many people take for granted. Next, our panel of voting rights experts will talk about today's challenges, how to overcome the obstacles to voting with an aggressive voting plan. Moderating the panel discussion is Joyce Johnson, a voting rights advocate and a member of the LEAD Board of Directors.
Thank you so much and welcome to this panel. It is the second in a series of webinars by LEAD. Today's panel, we have an august group of organizations and people who are in the fight for voting rights and voter protection. And we are facing on November 3rd, the most consequential election of our times. And because of that, and for the first time, arguably in my voting history, our voting rights are not secured. So many people are concerned that their right to vote on November 3rd, because they are registered, that they will not be able to vote for a host of reasons. Voter purges, polling site closes, And so we've got an esteemed panel who are operations, they are on the ground around the country, and we will hear from them as we talk about the lead up to the November 3rd election. The focus of this panel and what you will hear from them is how through their organizations, they are protecting the vote, securing the vote, doing voter protection. But more than that, the obligation for we the people, we the voter, to individually and with our families to make a voting plan. That's in the face of so many uncertainties, and there's a checklist that I used to go to the polling site and that I knew that I could vote. That is no such thing now. And so I'm so proud and pleased to be with these august folks who know far more about this than I do and will lead us to the path forward to make sure that every person can vote. So today what we have from us, Andrew Goodman, our good friend Maxim Thorne, if he will raise his hand. We have from Fair Fight Action, Tracy Ann Nelson. We have from Head Count Happen Victory, and from Vote Riders, a good friend and colleague, former colleague, Dave Grigg. And so just to do justice, I'm going to start with basically alphabetical order. So that is Andrew Goodman Foundation and Maxim Thorne. Take it away, Maxim. And so thank you so much for participating on this panel today.
Thank you so much, Joyce, and I'm so honored to be here. I apologize first for my voice. I'm recovering. Apparently I tested negative for COVID, but I seem to have all the symptoms. So I hope you can understand me. This is a fight that we will not let COVID win. Neither will we let the attacks on our democracy and our right to vote be successful. At the Andrew Goodman Foundation, our work has been going on for decades. It was birthed out of a tragedy when Andy, Michael, and James were murdered by the KKK in Mississippi during Freedom Summer 1964. And we seem to have been given this moment again, a moment of civil unrest, where America's finally facing the questions of systemic racism. And we have attacks on our democracy and deliberate efforts to suppress the vote, particularly of the people that we work with, which are young people. And Andrew Goodman Foundation is on over 80 campuses around the country, and particularly in 7 battleground states. We reach about just over 2 million students. And here's what we're seeing, exactly what you said, Joyce. We're seeing deliberate efforts to close polling sites on college campuses. Georgia State University just did that. They said they were going to close their polling site, even though they were opening the football game for everyone to go and the stadium, as opposed to making sure that students could vote to stay in the stadium. Florida tried to ban all polling sites, early polling sites from college campuses. We sued the state of Florida and we won. And then this year, this was 2018, and then this year, they tried to impose some pretextual parking permit limit, again, in an effort to ban polling sites from college campuses. We won that again. So here's what we're doing. We want to make sure that in Florida, throughout the state, people are advocating for polling sites on college campuses. This should be true for every state in the union. We have just issued a letter with the independent schools, universities in the country, saying to state legislatures that they must permit college campuses to have polling sites. In a study that we did, we showed not only do more young people vote disproportionately on college campus polling sites than any other polling site, but in fact, students of color disproportionately vote at those sites than any other kind of polling site. So we think this is incredibly important and it's a fight worth having. Secondly, Joyce, you talked about purges. We are really concerned. Even though we are very much in favor of voting by mail, as well as safe and CDC compliant polling sites for young people. However, we have seen that young people in particular, and particular young people of color, are being removed and having their requests for ballots denied disproportionately relative to the other population. So we've started a voter verification project where our ambassadors, we have hundreds of ambassadors around the country, which are young students on college campuses that we train and mentor, and they organize their peers so that they register and vote. Well, we're having them work with the clerks' offices at sort of reasonable boards of elections, as in Wisconsin, where Madison University is, so that they will find out if students who are registered on campus got their application for an absentee ballot denied, and then they can then have that student fix it. Now, it's ridiculous that this country doesn't do this at a national level anyway, but we are going to intervene and make sure that young people, if they're applying for an absentee ballot and they're being denied because they claim they spelled their name wrong or the address was missing or signature was missing, that they have an opportunity to correct it before November 3rd. And so those are all of the things that we are doing. I want to stress how important it is for this country at this time to ensure that young people who are caring about things like the climate and about racial justice and about our democracy, that their rights to vote are protected. And we need to do everything that we can to help them to lower the barriers. And the barriers are going up. Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Michigan, right? And we have to make sure that we can support them as a community, as lawyers, and as advocates, because we know that they are fired up about this election, and they will get out and vote if we make it possible.
Thank you so much, Maxim. Appreciate your passion. You're so right. Let us hear now from Tracy Ann Nelson from Fair Fight Action.
Thank you for this opportunity, Joyce. And I can't tell you how important this year is, but Fair Fight actually was birthed out of the voter suppression that we saw in the state of Georgia. And as a result, in our work, we've now seen it all across the country. To mimic some of what Maxim said, the voter suppression of people of color and of young voters is actually a scourge on what's happening. And so we were founded in 2018 to fight that. And we fight it in many different ways. We fight it by making sure people have access to the ballot, by making sure people register to vote, and that they then follow up and exercise their vote. And then we file lawsuits and do voter protection projects all around the country to ensure access to the ballot. The thing I think happened for so long was after the Voting Rights Act passed, we kind of took it for granted. And there were all of these supports in place, and people were executing their vote or not. And then after the Shelby case in Alabama, we just noticed this insidious effort to take away access and to discourage the people's opportunity to exercise their right to vote. And so we saw the mismanagement of how voters are handled in the state of Georgia and all around the country, the irregularities, the long lines, the closing of polling stations. And so the work that Fair Fight does is to challenge all of that infrastructure that diminishes our access to the ballot for everybody, for elderly, for Black and white, for young people, and for people of color in their communities. We noticed, especially in Georgia, this year, when you went to communities during elections, the lines were wrapped around buildings. And so people were standing in line for hours, which is a form of suppression. It's a form of diminishing their access, right? Because you still have to go to work, you still have to get home, and we're talking 7 and 8 hour lines in Georgia. And so we've challenged the Secretary of State there, and we know it happened in Wisconsin, and we know that they're trying to make all that happen. So the most important thing people can do is plan what they're going to do and execute the plan. If you're going to vote by mail, make the request, fill it out completely, take a picture of what you've completed, and send it back in. And in some states, the laws allow you to track your ballot. That is probably the best thing you can do to ensure that your vote gets counted, is to track your ballot all along the way. And if you go to our website, we can show you how to do that. And the second piece of that is, if you're not going to vote by mail and you're going to vote in person, vote early. I actually take my parents the first day of early voting to the polls. My dad loves that I do that. First thing you can do for that day to encourage voting is to, because they will, if they don't see the number of people show up for early voting, they try to collapse early voting days. And that was actually the thing that Stacey Abrams and I coalesced around. She was working in the legislature, I was working on voting rights, and they were trying to shrink early voting access in the state of Georgia. This is 10 years ago, and we've been working together ever since for a fair access and opportunity.
Thank you so much. And as we continue with our panel, and next we will hear from Tappan Hickory from Headcount. Great to
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm so happy to be here. I feel like I'm the kid in the classroom with the grown-ups for a moment. So many wonderful people on this call. So thank you. Headcount was founded in 2004 to harness the energy in the live music community and connect it to civic engagement. And we have done that through both the grassroots field campaign and through work with artists and influencers. This year, our field campaign, well, it got modified a little bit, but we had already established that our first call for this year was going to be to ask people to verify their status and make sure they're on the rolls. And the reason for that is because in 2018, the Supreme Court said that the states can purge any way they want. And we know that the states purge places where people are renters, where they're transient, and when they're of color. And that affects young voters, which are our target market, tremendously. And so the first thing we ask everyone to do is verify their status. And then if they think they're already registered. So we transitioned very quickly into a contesting platform that's been promoted by our influencers, where people are entered into a contest. Maybe they get an exclusive fan experience or tickets to a festival when festivals come back, simply for verifying themselves against the voter rolls in real time. It's been incredibly successful, and we know we've delivered high value through that. But the other thing that we, of course, ask people to do is get registered. And I think it's really important to note that because of COVID, we lost an average of 2 million voter registrations a month. 3/4 of voter registration happen in person. And no matter how many digital campaigns we do, we can't make that up on our own. And disproportionately, 18 and 19-year-olds are still behind. And then we are in September. And that's because they did not have access to classrooms and programs, both in their graduating year and also as they entered into college. There's been so much uncertainty about addresses and locations. So there's a very direct need that we're addressing to reach 18 to 24-year-olds, Gen Z, to make sure that they are registered. If they aren't sure if they're registered, that they verify. And then we're running what's called a Make Your Vote Count campaign, where we're giving people all 3 options based on their state, where they can find out how to vote early, whether it's early vote, traditional early voting, or in-person absentee, what their ID requirements are. We rely greatly on our friends at Vote Riders for that information. And also what their absentee ballot options are. And it is incredibly complicated. As of right now, in the past 10 days, 3 states have changed their absentee ballot rules, and we are almost to Election Day. Never in the history of elections have there been this many national level of change. And it's very hard to communicate. So we rely a great deal on our grassroots network, on our social media, but most of all our partners, whether they're brands or they're artists or influencers. And you'll see us everywhere, whether you're a YouTube gamer or a Twitch stick gamer or you're into music, we will reach you. And that is our goal. And we want to make sure that these young voters who are already marginalized by their age, the complicated process, and often their race. In case you didn't know, Gen Z, 1 in 10 voters, Gen Z identifies as 45% non-white, and 1 in 10 voters of this electorate will come from Gen Z. So it's a very diverse voting bloc, and we need to reach them and make sure that they have all the information they need as first-time voters and also often as marginalized voters. That's our goal, and that's what we're doing. And the voting plan is so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Dave Griggs, Vote Riders.
Thank you, Joyce. Really great to be on this panel, and I think this is so important. This idea of a vote plan, and it's just a really important service that you all are providing. I just want to talk very briefly about Vote Riders, who we are, what we do. We're a 501c3. Our issue is voter ID education and assistance. And what we do is we create a suite of tools and services and work through our partners to do what we can to close what we see as a fairly common programmatic gap when it comes to this voter ID piece. We work with all kinds of organizations, national, all the way down to local groups of volunteers, some of the other groups that are on this call. And that includes democracy organizations, direct service providers, really anybody who's in a place where they're interacting consistently with voters, with the idea of what can we do to get up-to-date and accurate voter ID information in front of people who can benefit from it. And it's quite the voter ID issue is quite a problem. It's estimated about 11% of otherwise eligible voters don't have a current government-issued photo ID, which is about 25 million people nationally. Disproportionately impacted communities are communities of color, students and young people, older voters who maybe don't drive anymore, voters with disabilities, anybody who's more likely to move or less likely to drive. There's a higher likelihood that they're going to be impacted by voter ID laws. And one of the things that we absolutely know, and this goes to your point about the vote planning, is that while we talk about 25 million people impacted, the problem is much greater than that because of voter confusion. People think they need an ID when they don't, or think they don't have the right ID when actually they do. And especially when we're talking about marginal voters, who many of whom, millions of whom, may be voting by mail for the first time this year. People are going through this process, and it's going to be different than what they've done in the past. So this issue of voter confusion is going to be an even bigger issue that we're all going to have to work together to face. So to answer your question about a voting plan, first off, if you haven't started already, start immediately. Procrastination is not your friend. Figure out, how are you voting? Are you voting by mail? Are you voting in person? Where are you voting? What do you need to vote? If you're going in person or by mail, there may be different laws when it comes to voter ID in your state. So educate yourself. A great service for that is the Vote Riders website, voteriders.org. Log on. We have all of this information, and we have people who are ready to answer your questions. But understand what the law is in your state. All of these are state-by-state laws. Are you in a voter ID state or are you not? Understand how do you plan to vote? Do you plan to vote by mail? Do you plan to vote in person? And think through that plan, each step of it. When are you going to go? Are you going to go on your lunch break? Are you going to vote early? Are you going to vote on election day? And absolutely think through, what do you need to bring with you to make sure that you can vote? And if you have any questions, please ask. We want to help and make sure that voters have what they need and that they have confidence that they have what they need.
Thank you very much, all of you. We've heard from all. Tell me 2 specific things that one must do, because this is our roll call final piece.
All students out there, text to this number, 56525. 56525, and put in AGF, which stands for Andrew Goodman Foundation. You will then be connected. You will be on our texting platform, and we will chat with you and tell you where to vote, where to poll, where your site is, how to get a shuttle to do that. And we have this customized for campuses like Badgers Vote at University of Wisconsin-Madison or Gators Vote in Florida. So again, text to be on our platform. The second thing is My Vote Everywhere is a student voter portal. myvoteeverywhere.org. You can find it, everything about your college campus and what you have to do on that website.
Excellent. Next, fair fight.
Okay. If you are going to vote by mail, you should request your ballot now so you have plenty of time to receive it, and you can go to www.vote.org and make your request. If your state offers ballot tracking, you can track your application all the way through. And for voters in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, and others, you can also identify drop boxes that you can take your ballot to.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And next happen.
We recommend, first of all, that you verify your status, register if you need to, check your polling place now, and then again the night before or the morning of Election Day with your county elections office, because polling places are shifting. And as you prepare for how to vote, please visit headcount.org/makeyourvotecount to understand all the ways that you can vote. It's not that we get to the polls on Election Day, it's that we get our vote cast before or on Election Day.
Thank you. And Dave, I'm going to give it to you again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joyce. Two things. First, educate yourself on your state's voter ID law. You can do that by going to voteriders.org. We have a chat bot that's all automated. You put in your state and it'll tell you what your state's voter ID law is and what you need to bring with you, or to what you need to vote by mail. And if you need something, connect with us. We will help you. We'll help you get your ID. We'll help you. We'll provide transportation. We'll help you if you need a document, a new copy of your birth certificate, whatever it is your situation, we'll help you through the process. So one, educate yourself, and two, if you need assistance, please reach out to us and we'll help you.
Panel, I am so grateful. We are so grateful at LEAD for your participation, your knowledge, and when folks seeing this, your passion for this work. We've got a lot to do. I am hopeful and grateful that at the very least, everyone who wants to vote and is eligible to vote can vote after having secured a voting plan. Thank you so much. And finally, I just have to show this. If nothing else, vote, vote, vote. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Half of LEAD. Thank you. Bye all. Pleasure.
Bye. On behalf of LEAD IntergenerationalSolutions.org, I would like to thank our program participants in part 2 of Race, Rights, Righteous Anger, Redemption, and Hope, the Intergenerational Path Forward. Part 3 of this series in October will include more of the conversation with Ambassador Andrew Young as we further explore the times in this continuing struggle for enlightenment and freedom for all. Please go to our website, leadintergenerationalsolutions.org, to join the movement to expand democracy through bridge building among the generations. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins.
Oh, yes, I know. 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 Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know.